Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. I have a really interesting guest, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun, especially in the beginning of this podcast, because I just found out some cool facts before I hit the record button. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have to tell this story. So, we're going to cover a couple of different things today. My guest is Signe Myers Hovem, and she has, if you're watching on Path 11 TV, she has written a book called The Space in Between, an Empath's Field Guide. So we have had a couple of people on the show before to talk about what it means to be an empath, how to ground, how to really take care of yourself if you're more of that empathic personality. So when I was reading about Signe, I also saw on her website this ITA, Integrative Therapeutic Alignment, that she is trained in as well. So I think we're going to cover a lot of different topics today. Let me tell you a little bit about Signe. She has created homes on 5 continents over 20 years, raised 4 uniquely sensitive children, pursued a special education lawsuit appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, volunteered in a hospice in Texas and an orphanage in Azerbaijan. And Signe works as a spiritual counselor and teaches workshops and trainings in the art of being an empath and the power of language in many countries around the world. She's also an ordained spiritual counselor through the Association for the Integration of the Whole Person. And during the years 2003 to 2009, she founded and operated Sacred Solutions, a Houston based spiritual counseling service located at the Spectrum Center in Houston, Texas. While living in Perth, Australia from 2015 to 2018, she continued studies in consciousness and energetic therapies at the Melanie Ryan Institute of Applied Consciousness. So I'm very excited to have Signe here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we have to talk first about your name. So I'll just let my listeners know that every time I have a podcast guest on, before I hit the record button, if they have a very unique name, it's always very important for me to get the right pronunciation of a person's name. I have 2 first names, April, Hannah, and so many people call me Hannah. And I really believe in the power of our names. And I think it's really important. And I hold it very dear to make sure that I am pronouncing the person's name correctly, because I do feel as souls, we kind of choose these names before we come in. And it's important. You should be called your name in the right way. So I asked Signe, how would she like this to be pronounced? Am I pronouncing it correctly? And Signe, I'm going to let you kind of take it over from here with the real kind of cool story about your name and how your parents chose it and your spiritual experience that you had.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much I could fill in this, but I do want to start with how the power of language, and like you were saying, how names are important and at a soul level. And, when you look at the word to create in the dictionary, it's to call into being. And so, when we have our name, we are being called into being in that unique and authentic way. And so for myself, my name was atypical I grew up in Evergreen, Colorado, which is a small mountain town west of Denver. And my name was like an enigma. I was like, nobody had seen it. Nobody knew how to pronounce it. And it's spelled Signe. And my parents were kind of enamored with Scandinavia. We had no Scandinavia connections as far as I could tell. They had named my older brother and sister Nordic names, and me being the youngest, I think they were out of options. So they went to a book and they saw my name and they saw it spelled and they thought, okay, this must be Signe. So I grew up with the name Signe, needing to always help people out how to pronounce it. And I was quite shy. And so I almost, thought my parents chose such a name that it would have to pull me into conversations, because otherwise I would just probably be a quiet wallflower. And oddly enough, I met my husband at University of Colorado, and he's Norwegian. And one of the first things he promptly told me was I said my name wrong. And then proceeded to tell me his mother and his sister also had that name. And in Norway, it's pronounced Signe. And my mother-in-law helped me understand that in the Viking days, Signe was used as a kind of almost a symbolism for victory or an invocation for victory. And then later, through Reformation and religion coming in, it became associated with a blessing. So my name went from being this very kind of enigmatic presence in my life that I didn't quite know what to do with it. And I almost felt like I had to grow into it to kind of have that. And sometimes it felt like a curse, but then to learn it was a blessing has been, pretty symbolic of my life's journey about accepting mystery and the divine. And at one point in my spiritual path, where I knew that on one hand, I could be a Signe, but I could also be a Signe. But what was I really and truly? And I remember sitting in a meditation, kind of not being, like a child, who's whining, like, what's my name? How do you say it? But I was really having some self-doubt deep at my core about who am I and how do I even say my name, as basic as that. And I'm not usually clairaudient, but I got a very clear, crystal clear, in my space, it said Signe. And so, when given the chance to introduce myself, I will introduce myself as Signe. But of course, when I'm out in Norwegian society and they see my name, I also answer to Signe.
Wow. I love that. And, it's just so interesting too. Like you said, you were brought up in Colorado, but your parents had like this fascination with Nordic names. I mean, of course, that makes me go down the path of past lives or, were they intuiting something that they had a connection with? And then here you are marrying a man from Norway, and that's so wild to me.
It is. It's one of those interesting developments. And I use my name, in the book as well to talk about how when we start our life, oftentimes what is going to be our greatest teachers were there at the beginning. And it takes us a while to wake up and to actually become aware of them. And for my name, I would say my name has been a representative of my path and being part of my teaching. But so has my sensitivities and being empathic. And, so it's, I've always been sensitive. I think everyone is born sensitive. And I was born empathic, but I didn't understand that. I had to, we all kind of do our own independent studies on life and where are our teachers, what are they, and how do they show up? And they show up in all different ways.
Yeah. So I want to ask you the question too, because this is the question when it comes to empaths that I get a little confused with, because like you just said, we're all born empathically, but how come some people can lose that? Like, I feel like if you have a pulse and you are a soul in a human body, that you are an empath. Like, aren't we all natural empaths because we can all feel and sense and intuit energy around us? Or maybe I too am just a natural empath and don't understand how somebody couldn't be. But I feel like, how do we begin to distinguish the difference between being a human being and being able to sense energy, feel it, see people who are crying and, feel that within our hearts, as opposed to like really getting into the empathic personality? What's the difference in that fine line that draws you over to somebody that wants to read your book, The Space in Between?
Well, there's a lot in there. I wanted to say that, from my perspective, we're born sensitive. Whether we're all born empathic, I've not done testing and I can't give out, the HSP label. I think have found a genetic marker and they estimate between 15 and 20% of the population has this gene, which is the highly sensitive person. And, that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book, is because when that label came out and it was, it became a tool that people could use And anyone who was sensitive, I think, flocked to that because it was like, suddenly we can have language, we can, share ourselves, we can understand ourselves better because here, here's this research and these are our traits and this and this and this. But I always found that the empathic receptivity on the intuitive level, which is meaning that you are able to energetically receive emotions and thoughts and physical discomfort from emissions out into the open space that don't originate from yourself. That that was not as easily explained under the HSP label. And one of the reasons why I say this is because usually an empathic person who's unaware that they're empathic and can receive information, they usually at times saying, did I imagine that? And they question their imagination about the reality because they can't put the two together. Like, why would they be feeling that? Why would that person have a funkiness and how could I pick it up? But a highly sensitive person, I don't believe goes to, did I imagine that, when they're overstimulated because of social environment. So this is where I started to see, it was great initially. I think the label came out in 1989 or early 1990s. And it was very helpful, I think, for people to be able to say, I'm a highly sensitive person. I just want to, now that we have more evolution, we have more language to talk about this and a consciousness, that let's kind of take some of the people out from under that umbrella and see, are you also, because you can be highly sensitive and empathic, or you can, there's a whole spectrum of different mix and matches. But the reason why I think it's important to distinguish where your source of sensitivities originates from is because, if you're a highly sensitive person, you're going to get a lot of support through therapeutic counseling. It's accepted as a conventional therapy has highly sensitive therapists out there to help you manage your nervous system and to regulate your emotions and this. But for the empathic people who don't understand that they're empathic, and this is partly what's going on with their sensitivities, they would need to find support more in an intuitive, healing environment to learn about energy and their energy body and to integrate this awareness that, and this is why I say empath. If you identify as an empath, you're on a spiritual path because your sensory nature, your sensitive empathic nature is going to make you look at your own stuff, because you need to clear up your own stuff to be able to actually manage and use these intuitive channels, because you need to know what is yours. And if you pick something up, is this mine or is it someone else's? And, so first you have to understand, just because you feel something, it doesn't mean it's yours and you don't need to process it. So that's one level of awakening. And then you get to, okay, I'm empathic, I accept that, but now what do I do with this information? And that's another level. And so I like to say, and I feel like I'm on this big bend on language and the dictionary, but I like to define an empath as somebody who understands they're empathic and they have the ability to, to work with energy, they can engage it, they can be active with it, because everyone is empathic, but you're not born an empath. You really, truly become one through spiritual maturity, through your life experiences, accepting of yourself, moving into your heart with compassion. And when we're empathic, the people who are born and they're wired this way, where they have this extra ability or sensitivity to pick up energetic information, it's very passive because, and I think that's why it's confusing and why a lot of people are unaware, is because this passive nature of our senses are one-way channels into us to give us a relationship to our environment, and we develop perception to this. So I always like to come to a nose. We smell very passively. You're in a room and you smell someone cooking. The smell came to you. You just received the information. you could understand somewhere nearby there is someone cooking. But if you wanted to go investigate, well, who's cooking? What are they cooking? You've just then, when you go into investigate, you've gone into an active role. And that's why I like to say you can be a passive empathic person who just receives information, learns, how to manage that. But when you step over the threshold to becoming active and wanting to engage that energetic impression, that's when you're truly in the realm of developing the abilities to be an empath. And I know that, and one of the reasons why I felt I needed to define this is because when I was writing my book, I would often be triggered from my document saying, this word is not found, this word is not in the dictionary. Or if I go to the dictionary, it says the origin is science fiction or fantasy. And then I really began to understand, why is it difficult for empathic, sensitive people to language their reality to others? Because when the dictionary doesn't even afford you existence, it's very hard. There's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of confusion. And when you want clarity and you go to the dictionary, it doesn't even really define for you what your reality is doing. It just basically says it's paranormal and science fiction and fantasy. So this is where, my book, I hope it offers people who are questioning their sensitivities real opportunity to kind of just go within and, take as much time as you need, do some self-discovery. I have prompts at the end of each chapter. And I really want to bring people back to their own authority, because I think as sensitive people, we have instinctually conformed. And from the moment we enter into society, we conform to fit in, and yet by conforming, we never belong to ourselves. And so I really hope that this is a homecoming for people into their body, into their sensitive nature, into their authenticity. And that was my hope and intention with it.
Yeah. Oh my God. There's so much good stuff that you just said in there. Let me see if I can pull some of these juicy points out. Well, first, what were some of the words that you looked up in the dictionary that you're referring to that would be considered more paranormal or
empathic, or
just
empath.
the word empath? Just the word empath.
The word empath. And then you have, a lot of people who use the word now who are more or less still on a physical realm consciousness, the five sensory, and this is the reality. And so like I had a friend recently email me, and she said, "Oh, my therapist just told me I'm an empath and gave me some book suggestions." And I was like, okay, that's really nice. You're getting the support for something. But it made me aware that people hand other people labels all the time. And this is part of also conforming, and we accept it without even questioning, well, what does that really mean? And so there's a lot of people who, I noticed online forums would go on about how their sensitivity, that they were an empath and that they were, overwhelmed, and it was a gift that was a curse. And there was a lot of unmanageable experiences that were being touted, almost like a rite of passage, or I don't know if I'm explaining this well enough, but I started to say, let's take a moment and just define this energetically. And what I discovered is that, an empathic nature means that you're receiving information. But unfortunately, in the physical realm, if you're feeling something that feels like it's inside you've already taken it on. But energetically, you can feel something, and it actually doesn't have to be within your energy field. An empath's energy field, if they pick up something from the environment, will expand a foot to 2 feet. And this is why we are called sponges, because literally our energy fields will expand. But that doesn't mean that expansion means that it's sucked it up and it's now part of us. What I discovered is we have a mechanism in place where it holds it on the outside, this expansion, it holds it until we can discern what to do with it. And just like when we, our five sensory, we rely on it to tell us about the environment so that we can act. So we smell smoke, we are aware, we're ready to go. We see fire, we hear an explosion. All of these things give us indication that we need to take cover, we need to, prepare ourselves in some way. Well, our empathic sensitivities has an innate intelligence as well to want to protect us. And so when it expands and it holds it for us, but if you're not aware and it just holds it there, it becomes almost a sponge that's oversaturated. And it needs to be squeezed out. It needs to have some vitality to it. And so in my book, I described what happens, when you're an unaware empathic person and you're growing up and your sponge kind of stops working because it never got really properly engaged with. But when you are aware that you have this ability and you pick up something, say you feel your mood change, or you feel like I'm a physical empath, so I often feel things in my body. If I take a moment and I discern, okay, I've picked something up. First I say, is it mine? Because I have to identify, is it mine? Because maybe it's something similar to what's going on in my own life, or it's similar to a trigger. So maybe, this is also a way to give me guidance to come back to myself and see what I need to work on. Is it mine to witness? And if it isn't yours to witness, if it isn't yours to engage with, then I just simply say a prayer. And a prayer is enough. You're honoring and you're offering compassion, but you're not trying to process. You're not trying to go rescue someone. You're not stepping over boundaries. And so in this way, when I discovered that I had this, like almost, and suitcases where they have that extender zipper and it lets you get that, a little bit more space. When I realized that my empathic energy mechanism was kind of this extender, I realized that it is protective. And what, I don't really need to fear my environment. And it was humbling. I don't know how many people in the population are empathic. I do tend to think of us as boots on the ground, in the sense that we seem to be, our energetic blueprint seems to be one that we have a deep connection to the earth, to life, to nature, to emotional depth. But it also means that we have perhaps quite a bit of challenges because we have our own life. We have our own life experiences. We have to master our sensitivities. We have a lot going on, but, once you find your balance, and I know I'm putting a lot out there and I hope people read my book, but, for me, the function and purpose of an empath is to sense balance. And that is why an empathic person can feel a tension in the room, can hear when something's not being spoken, when, the energy's off, so we are balancers. We can, as almost as a surrogate, when you accept and honor yourself in your true nature, this is when your life comes into service.
Yeah, you brought up so many good points too. And going back to the Facebook point of where you were reading some of these things where people were saying it's a blessing and a curse and a little bit of a rite of passage. That was actually one of the reasons why I was hoping we would talk about integration therapeutic alignment, because there's a part of me that I'm so done talking about empaths. It's kind of like everybody's an empath, everybody's over identifying with it. And I feel like sometimes people can take that identity and almost use it as the curse, like, well, I'm too much of an empath. I feel everything. I can't go out in the world. I can't go out and be around people because it's too much for my nervous system. And, I've taught a lot of different energy courses to, clients and students of mine. And when you become more empowered and realize, like you said, and just understand what is happening and what this is about, you can live a very fulfilling life, and really use it to your advantage rather than feeling like this is a bit of a curse, because, I sometimes see people wear this badge of being an empath, but it just feels icky, and it's like, no, you don't want to become a victim because you're an empath or you're a highly sensitive person. Like, let's turn this into a skill that you have, that you can
Yeah.
read this energy and
And I think, there's a chapter in my book called An Honest Assessment.
Mhm.
And I want, what I think is important for me when people take the label, I'm an empath, they have to understand that the energetic realm is going to respond to that. It's going to take them at their word. And I'm very big with language. So when you say that I'm an empath, and yet you don't understand exactly what that means energetically, like the service that you have just invoked, you are going to be overwhelmed because I'm not going to guarantee, but the environment's going to respond because if you're declaring yourself an empath, then that which needs balancing or you just, it's going to respond to you. And this is why I feel like, I don't want to deny anyone their true nature. And if they're empathic, there is an arc. And and this arc goes from being unaware because, when we're born, our parents aren't given us a little label that says, oh, she's extra sensitive, be careful. And here's the manual. Um, so we all awaken in our own way to our own sensitivities. And we have a relationship with it. But I did a course called Evolving Your Sensitivities. Are you a sponge or are you an empath? And partly because when you take your sensitivities and allow them to be guidance rather than something you have to manage or, um, you know, resent, when you shift it into being guidance, a whole nother level of life has opened up and wonder and curiosity and mystery. And it's beautiful. And I just, for myself, I wished I had this book early on. And that's also how I wrote the book. It was almost a letter to my younger self because I didn't have, I didn't even know the word empath until I was my late 20s, early 30s. And at that point, no one was just floating it around like they do now. And, I also like to take the time to say, when people say empathy and empathetic, that's a lot to do with the physical realm. But when you go to empath and empathic, that's the energetic realm. And, there's empathy on both sides, but you can be empathic and not have empathy because you can be an overwhelmed, sponge not working empath who, has had a lot of trauma in your life and you don't have the capacity to care. And so, there's a lot of opportunity for healing and going within. But as you've just said, that once you mastered it, once you get that skill and that awareness, there's a lot of liberation and a lot of freedom and a lot of expansiveness.
yeah. And you mentioned earlier about how people who are highly sensitive people may reach out to a therapist, and go for therapy to understand how to regulate their nervous system. And, being a mental health therapist myself, what I find interesting in our training is I think that probably a large majority of people that go into the field to become therapists have some sort of sensitivity or empathic ability. But in our training, we are almost taught to also turn it off, because you have to learn how to hold space for others. And, we're told don't cry with your clients, or, it's like you kind of never really want to show shock upon your face, or, you almost really have to control the whole being as a vehicle to be able to hold space, for the client. So as you're as you're talking about this, and I'm just thinking about a lot of my friends who have gone into this field and, my personality myself, there's almost a part of our empathic ability or being that highly sensitive person that is almost told like it's not okay, or like you have to really manage it or control it. And in order for you to do the job well, which, I think is really sad in some ways.
Yeah. No, it's true. I also think there's but the opposite is the tendency of wanting to shush somebody who's crying. That we get uncomfortable if somebody's having an emotional, not breakdown, but just being expressive. And I think, to catch yourself and ask yourself, before you go and you touch someone, because I was also, instructed you shouldn't touch somebody who's
Right.
to comfort, because you are actually interfering with them processing. And the minute you touch them, it kind of just puts a break in the circuit.
Right.
And, but at the same time, when you go to comfort somebody, I've seen it done because of the other person can't handle being around emotions.
Yeah.
And it's just too uncomfortable. And like, let's give you some tissues.
Yes. It's funny you say that because when I run my groups, that is my one rule, because one of my teachers when I was going through grad school had this rule too, and I absolutely loved it. And the rule in all of my groups is you don't pass tissues. People know where the tissue box is if they need to grab it for exactly that same reason. Like you said, it really can break up the processing of what's going on. Some people don't want tissues, but it kind of signals like, oh, here, stop crying,
Yeah.
And a lot of times it is when we're in a group setting. I tend to do probably have highly sensitive people in my groups that take my groups or are the empaths. And if they're not really grounded in their own energy, their first thing is just to want to comfort and console and give big hugs. And it's like, not everybody needs that. So yeah, I kind of have a rule about that. Like, no passing tissues. Here they are. There's boxes all around. If somebody needs one, they'll grab it themselves. But my group and the people who return to my groups now understand why we kind of have that, because it is important for like the natural process of the body to just go through what it needs to go through when it's at that really high emotional state.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes courage. I mean, we get to experience, that part of ourselves, that vulnerability. And, that's a beautiful thing. And if you're holding space for someone, it doesn't mean that you've abandoned them. You're just there. You're respecting them and what they need to do. And I'll just briefly talk about ITA, if that's fine.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I want to just briefly say, so I did energetic studies back in, I started first with reading. I had my Donna Eden and my Barbara Brennan. And then when we moved from Norway to Houston, I had 4 small children, and I really wanted to do energetic studies because I was ill in Norway, and I had recovered with the use and the help of an energy worker. And I became very curious about energy, and that was kind of my awakening time. And I found a small school in Houston that offered a 3-year program. And it was a lot of red road, and my instructor was part Lakota. And so I was exposed to a lot of different, more or less shamanic teachings. And I woke up and I had a lot of great instructional healing for myself and starting to assist with others. But my family started to travel, and we've lived on 5 different continents, and each place I would go, I would just kind of be doing my own thing, my own meditation. But when we got to Perth, Australia, I was really wondering why, I was following my husband around with his career, and our kids were all grown by that time. So it was just the 2 of us, and we were as far away from them as possible being in Australia. And I was like, well, why am I here? And I really wanted to study the energy system and the nature of consciousness at a higher level. And I found the Melanie Ryan Institute of Applied Consciousness. And she's an amazing woman. her heritage comes from the Canary Islands, and she was a fourth generational energy worker. And, she was really trained at the feet of her grandmother, who was doing energy work. And her great grandmother was presumably, legendary in this area. And she was always told, well, you can see energy, or you can deal with energy because you come from a family, so you're gifted. And not that she took offense to this, but she really didn't believe that you had to be gifted or born into a family with 4 generations. And so as she did her clinic, and over 30 years of working with people's energy system, she could see the patterns of certain illnesses and diseases and conditions. And so through this, seeing these patterns, she created a systems charts for different ailments, because she discovered that these ailments would travel through the energy systems, and there's different parts of an energy system. And so the integrated therapeutic alignment that she created came out of seeing how all these different systems would interact with each other and the mind. And the mind was very important to address the subconscious mind. So I was very, curious about her. We met, and I sat into a lecture, one of her lectures. And what really impressed me was, she started to talk about polarity and duality, and how, the earth is a natural, its perfect state is to have polarity. But the human consciousness came in and interpreted it as duality. And so this was really intriguing to me, to see how the physical principles of the physical realm gets interpreted by the subconscious mind, and it tries to make sense of it as best as it can. And so, I was really curious, because she was showing new ways of looking at energy, and how the mind creates a relationship with what it does not know, and what it's trying to figure out how to survive. So, she offers a 3 tier structure, and under her center, she has the ITA development, but she also has a meditation practice called Mahat. And the Mahat meditation has been now being researched in Australia at some of the university fairs, because her meditations are a takeoff of the ITA, but it shows a person how to run energy in a meditative systems. And so just like you want to keep your physical body in condition, you want to eat well, you want to exercise. In her meditation practice, you're running energy through your energy systems, and she looks at the higher chakras, which brings 7 chakras up to 12 chakras, and the 8 extraordinary vessels. So she follows a lot of Eastern, meridians and 8 extraordinary vessels and stuff. But it's the reason why I bring this up is because I think, just like you said, you can get so tired of hearing this level of, I'm an empath, I'm sensitive, and it never rises to a higher level of the spiritual expression of, being in service, and why are you sensitive? And when you work with consciousness, when you work with energy, it kind of just brings it out of that mundane. Not to say it's mundane, but it can be lower expressions of the human experience. And so anyone who's interested, I would say, you can check out her website, but or if you, like, Donna Eden is a great one. And I know you've had your teachers. There are so many people right now. It's actually incredible to see how many people are out there offering guidance or teachings or understandings, and to keep the curiosity and the wonder and the joy. This is wonderful.
Yeah, one of my teachers was a first generation of Donna Eden's practitioners that she first trained. So I'm really familiar with Donna Eden's work, and Melanie's work sounds really fascinating too. I believe you even sent me the information. You said they'd probably make a great guest on the podcast as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know we're kind of running out of time a little bit here, but I wanted to get to, because you were just talking about the chakra systems, and one of my little bullet points in your book was also talking about the energetic blueprint of an empath. And, you kind of have really beautiful diagrams in here about, the energetic field, the auric field. And it's interesting because I believe when I was reading, you were making mention like the first three chakras are more of like the physical world, right? The dense experience that we have. And as we begin to move more up into the upper chakras, that's more of like the energetic field and, the ethereal element. But I wanted you to have the chance to explain what the energetic blueprint is of an empath.
Well, what I want people to understand is that, we're receiving information and our consciousness, we're energy beings. I like to say that, you can have a coin and its heads and its tails. And most people will only see that it's either heads because it's heads up on the table or tails and it's only one. But that coin is made from the same material. It may be heads and tails, but it's the same material. And that is us as a human spiritual being, is that, we're both physical and we're energetic. We heads, tail, but we're all energy. And but an empathic blueprint for me is that the sensitivities we have are the threads of lights that create our energy bodies. And the amount of light running through these thin threads, called nadis, in the yogic world, they call them nadis, really kind of indicates your sensitivity. And I liken that our subtle bodies, we have four, and they are correlated to our lower four chakras. So we have our physical body, subtle body, which is our root chakra, our first chakra. And then we have our emotional subtle body, and it's part of our second chakra, which is our emotional body and our emotional center. And then we have our solar plexus, third chakra, mental body. And then we have our fourth, our heart chakra, spiritual body. And what I like to say is that if you were an octopus and, they have tentacles in which they reach out into their environment and feel, and, this is how they're kind of feeling their way through their environment. We do the same thing energetically. You could consider your subtle bodies as your tentacles. So if you're someone who just happens to be really, receptive for emotional, what's ever out there emotionally, it's because your subtle body, has this extra light presence and is able to receive that. But I do say that the blueprint is really setting up that you need to work with your lower three chakras to know your own life story and your own belief systems, and where would energy, constrict and can, not let it flow very well, because that's going to impact you too. And speaking of Donna Eden, Titiana Dahlin, her daughter, was one of the persons who blurbed my book, which I was very happy about that. But she and her sister and her mom just recently did a 5 elements course on their platform. And one of the interesting things they said, it was that, a lot of sensitive people have a lot of water element in them. But an unbalanced water can have a distortion, just like if you were underwater and listening and hearing and seeing, there's a distortion. If you're unbalanced in yourself, you could be overly sensitive and hear something that wasn't really intended. And so this is why, an empathic person, you have a lot going on, because you need to be balanced. You need to know your story, and then you're available to do the other stuff, So work on yourself, go inward and work on yourself. And just like I said, if you said I'm an empath and the environment would respond, if you said, I really need to figure myself out, I need some space, it's remarkable how the environment will pull back and give you that space. And so this is where I want you to kind of feel that the environment we're in is also still a part of us, and it's listening and it's responding.
Yeah. And, one of my teachers would always say energy follows thought, right? Or, that's why we have to be careful with our language and, our words. And yeah, it's funny. You're reminding me when I was in my early 20s and saw my very first energy healer. I was, at the time just floating in my upper chakras. She's like, April, you have to get in your body. And so I was always very psychic and very intuitive. And she said, you'll become much more intuitive and much more psychic if you spend some time in your body in the lower chakras. But I remember there was a part of me that was so used to like the upper energy that I was almost afraid if I really embodied, the lower chakras, would I lose it? Would I not be able to? And she was 100% right. Just like what you said, it's like you have to work within those lower chakras as well, which then begin to help create more, substance and strength for the upper chakras to be able to work, so it
Yeah.
really is a collective.
And I like to point out that, we mimic nature. I mean, if you have any questions about anything, go to nature and it will show you. And one of the things that I found interesting with like the energy movement is that, our nervous system and our circulatory system, it is an up and a down, and it's a contraction and a release. And our energy system does all of that. We are descending down at the same time we're coming up. Our esophagus, our heart, everything is pulsing and life is pulsing. And when you're stagnant or you're rigid, that's when the pulse gets dampened. And so this is also another important reason why doing breath work, doing body work, being meditation, being curious, being open, and I also like to say that, your upper chakras is kind of the more theoretical aspects of life, and your lower chakras, the application. And sometimes taking theoretical into application, you meet the heart. And that's why we have so many heart lessons. We need to figure out, how can you take something theoretically and actually embody it?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Signe, so much. This was such a beautiful conversation. Again, her book, The Space in Between, an Empath's Field Guide. That's the cover for those of you watching on Path 11 TV. And it also sounds like that you're teaching classes and stuff like that. So where can people find your information and get your book?
Yeah. I'm www.smhovem.com. Everything's there. I kind of go between Oslo and Colorado. So a lot of remote stuff at the moment, but I'm hoping, once things open up a little bit more, then I will be able to, do more in-person teaching.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much. This really was such a great conversation. I'm glad we got to touch on, the empath, the highly sensitive person, and the ITA, the integrative therapeutic alignment. And we will also put that website in the show notes for Melanie's school. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. All right.
April. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yes, you're so welcome. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you learned as much as I did, and there's more to learn if you purchase her book, The Space in Between. So thank you, everyone, again for listening. Remember, if you like the podcast, you can rate it. Go to the app, rate us on iTunes. Those always help us tremendously. I read them all, and I thank you all for those of you who have made those comments and gave us 5 stars. We appreciate it. And if you like to see who I'm talking to, head on over to path11tv.com. Our newest podcast episodes are always up there for free. If you want a 7-day free trial, you can go ahead and hit the free trial, get 7 days and watch all of the magnificent videos of education that we have on there about life after death and consciousness. Or you can just watch the Path 11 podcast and see the beautiful face that I got to watch for this whole entire episode. So thank you, everyone, again. Take care and be well.